Porsche has a problem that's been brewing for 40 years. The original forced induction 911 was so outrageously powerful that its name became an icon. That name still refers to just one car. Tell your neighbor, "Hey, I just bought a turbo."
Put some clothes on, you freak.
And he'll know you're talking about the top-of-the-line Porsche 911. Uh-oh. What was once an ultra-rare, ultra-high-tech piece of equipment can now be found everywhere. You can get a turbo in a Kia. And the base 911 Carrera now has two of them. Porsche obviously can't call it the turbo. Oh dear, what should Porsche call this thing? The Porsche 911 Carrera Turbo. I might be tempted to call it the Porsche 911 Sacrilege, because I'm a purist and I think non-turbo Porsche 911s should be non-turbo. I'm gonna try my hardest to be objective, but let me tell you something. I'm gonna be really pissed off if brilliant engineering gets in the way of my purist soapbox rhetoric. Then again, I think that describes the last 50 years of Porsche. If you can tell the difference between this and the previous 911, you either work for Porsche or you need to get out more. Here are a couple of hints on how to tell them apart. Skinny lights. It has these. Ooh, this is big. Center exhausts. Vertical slats. And these things too. All right, enough of that. This is, as I'd call it, the poverty package 911. Hey, it's under $100,000. You don't have to be a 1%er to afford it. Whatever. But I think it's probably the more genuine 911 because it doesn't have any performance-enhancing options. Meaning, none of active sway bars or rear-wheel steering that take away from the 911 driving experience for the sake of setting a faster lap time around the Nürburgring. Turn in, you actually feel the back end heave over as all the weight of that engine tries to pull it around. And it's got little brakes and little tires, so it rides well. And then that 911 traction coming out of corners, it's just otherworldly. You'd never know it's a turbo from listening to it in the car. They have two sound symposers bringing all that intake noise in. And it sounds just like the old 911s. Outside, sort of at idle and normal driving, all you hear is turbo noises. They're not audible at all inside the car, but outside it's great. It's great. Everyone will know that you have a turbo, but inside you get just classic 911 soundtrack. And of course, a manual transmission. And for all of the things that Porsche does well, this is what Porsche does the best. The shifter feels perfect, but more importantly, the clutch engages exactly where you want it to. The engine blips and responds exactly how you expect it to. Love that about Porsche. But instead, let me remind you that this is not a new car. This is the second generation of the 991, an unusually well-built GT car. It's quite easy on the eyes, and that wheelbase stretch, which was done for the sake of making a hybrid version that thank God hasn't happened yet, did wonders for ride quality and high-speed stability. Oh, I can compliment this car all day, but don't think I've gone soft. It's not perfect, and I do have my complaints. The 991, when it first came out, had terrible electric power steering. They've done a whole bunch of stuff to this one where I can actually feel the road. It picks up that front wheel because there's no weight on there, and you just got all this kind of power, just puts it all down. This is no 997, and they've not gotten close to that, but at least it's far better. And this is a big car. This is more of a GT than it is a little nimble sports car. But while we're on the subject of flaws, Porsche done inserted the biggest flaw you could ever put in a sports car, and that's a turbocharger. And my big question here when I'm driving this car is, does this new downsized turbocharged 3-liter flat 6 ruin the 911 driving experience? And when you're caning it on a back road, no, that's the amazing part. It just responds quickly enough and linear enough that you don't really notice it. And unlike most turbocharged engines, it revs out. It makes power all the way to its red line. Does this car have turbo lag? Yes, of course. And listen, if somebody tells you that such and such turbocharged car doesn't have any lag, ignore everything they've said before and everything they're going to say after, because they don't understand the fundamentals of how an engine works. So to make sure you don't make that mistake, let me give you a quickie lesson. And I'm sorry about the tech stuff, but you gotta know this. The way a turbocharger works is such that there will always be lag. Think of a turbocharger as like a pinwheel in the exhaust pipe. When there's air moving through, it's forcing the pinwheel to spin. When you're off the gas, there's no air coming through the engine. The throttle's closed, so there's nothing coming down the exhaust pipe either. And that means the turbo's kind of hanging out. When you crack the throttle open, engine sucks in air, combusts it, expanding that air, and then shoves it down the exhaust pipe. That starts to spin up the turbo. But the turbine and that compressor that's attached to it need to get up to like 150,000 RPM. That's a huge spin up, and that takes time. That's what we call turbo lag. How much lag there is depends on, well, the engine and the turbos and all that stuff, but also how high the engine is in its rev range. The faster the engine is spinning, the more air can move through it, and the quicker that turbo can spool up. Since I have no life whatsoever, I've spent the last couple of hours measuring the maximum output of the Porsche's engine at 500 RPM intervals from 1500 all the way to 6000 RPM. And then I did the same thing in my 30-year-old naturally aspirated Volkswagen. And then I did it all over again to measure the amount of time it takes to get from cracking the throttle open to that maximum output. And then I made a graph. Isn't it beautiful? So, the blue line is my old Volkswagen. When you get on the gas, regardless of the engine speed, in about 2/10, 3/10 of a second, the engine responds, boom, with maximum output. The turbo is in red, and this is a very big difference. This is why so many people worry that putting turbos on a 911 fundamentally changed the way it drives. At higher RPM, responds 6/10 of a second, so 3 times longer than an old Volkswagen. Down low, you floor that car at 2000 RPM and you get an immediate response from the engine, and then 2 seconds later, a secondary response when the turbocharger spools up. That is the lag that you notice. Over here, well, it's consistent at least, and your brain can sort of ignore 6/10 of a second delay as long as it's consistent. Every time you go for the gas at, let's say, 4, 5, 6,000 RPM, the engine responds in 6/10 of a second. That means the car would be consistent on a racetrack. And that means we should talk to Randy and see if we can fool him into thinking maybe this is a naturally aspirated 911. Randy? What the hell are you doing?
I'm cleaning up my mess from shooting the racing line.
So obsessed with lap times. Ridiculous. It's okay. Rubber on the road's okay. Randy, this is the slowest 911 you can buy. This is like the broke bitch, ain't got no options, no performance enhancing, nothing, worst, slowest 911.
You mean it's the closest a 911 can now be to 1965?
Yes, which is exactly why I wanted it. I can't wait to hear what you have to say, because this, to me, is more of a 911 than most other 911s.
More real, huh? More raw, more pure.
Wrong, right? I mean, the whole point of a 911 is the engine's in the wrong spot. It was a triumph of engineering dynamics.
This car will drive like a 911, and then I carry in lots of speed, keep the weight forward, then the tail comes out a little bit, and you get on the power, transfers weights, and settles it. Yep. Classic 911, I like that behavior when it's controllable, and it is here. This is a cool car, it's more pure, it's more real 911, with everything turned off.
Funny you should say that, because it's got 2 turbos on it. And that was my big fear, was that they were gonna somehow alter the driving experience so that it was no longer pure 911. But I'm wondering if you're upset by this turbo at all.
On track, I have very little sense of that. In fact, say a tight hairpin like this. We're low in the rev, second gear is tall. It doesn't pull real strong at first, but guess what? Neither did the old 911, it needed the revs. So in a sense, I mean, when the turbos come on, they come on very gradually. It's linear. It doesn't hit you like a hammer like it did in 1976.
Or even the modern 911 turbo. That, you hit the gas and you get this BAM of power.
It hits you hard.
This just builds nice and easy.
Yeah.
So the slowest 911 you can buy is 1.6 seconds faster than the overachieving little BMW M2, the one that's faster around a track than an M4. See, the 911 doesn't need ceramic brakes or computer-controlled trickery to be fast. Never did. And actually, it didn't need the turbos either. The real reason Porsche did all that? Fuel economy. If you drive like an old lady, this turbo Carrera will, according to the EPA, save you $560 in gas over the next 100,000 miles compared to the old 911. That's probably half of what those turbochargers and intercoolers cost in the first place. So it's a win-ish. But actually, it is, because this base 911 is about even with the last Carrera S in all of our instrumented tests. That means the turbo added speed without ruining the driving experience. And while that annoys my purist self, a purist self who would still rather have the slower, naturally aspirated version, even I have to admit that Porsche did the turbo thing right this time. Just don't call it a turbo.